January 6, 1932, Ravinia, Illinois, 30 kilometers north of Chicago, 3:30 in the afternoon. 70-year-old Julius Rosenwald's breathing stops in the estate's second-floor bedroom, which the owner himself simply called home. Death's time is recorded by the doctor. In the room are 5 children and closest relatives. Outside the window, deep snow lies covering several acres of land. Yet in this scene, there's nothing of a monarch's passing grandeur, no golden candelabras, no mourners' crowd, no priests reading prayers over one of the planet's richest people's body. Experts at this moment estimate the man lying on the bed's fortune, yet naming an exact figure is impossible due to the Great Depression's ongoing financial chaos. 3 years earlier, before Black Tuesday, his capital exceeded $200 million, which in today's terms amounts to more than $3.5 billion. He was Sears, Roebuck, and Company's Board of Directors chairman, a corporation that was essentially the early 20th century's Amazon. He was the man who taught America to consume. Yet at death's moment, his personal accounts were rapidly emptying. This wasn't bankruptcy. This was a plan. 10 years before this quiet death, in 1922, a heavy freight train arrived at Benson Town's railway station, North Carolina. 2 boxcars were packed to capacity. The manifests listed a single item, Model 289. The cargo weighed 45 tons. Inside were 30,000 parts, 10,000 yellow pine boards, 750 pounds of nails, 27 gallons of paint, window frames, doors, shingles, and a detailed 75-page instruction manual. This was Magnolia, the most expensive, most luxurious, and most ambitious house ever sold by Sears. In the 1918 Modern Homes catalog, this mansion occupied the center spread. The price was $5,972, an amount that at the time could buy 3 ordinary houses or 5 cars. Magnolia was poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's historic Cambridge mansion's architectural copy, a 2-story portico with Ionic columns, a grand oak staircase, French doors, a solarium, a servant's room, a library. It was a palace that could be ordered by mail simply by checking an order form box and sending a check to Chicago. For millions of Americans, this house became ultimate success's symbol. If you could afford Magnolia, you were no longer a farmer or a worker. You became the new era's aristocrat. The paradox was that the man who created this system, the man who made all America dream of columns and oak staircases, now lay dead in a house that architectural critics called strangely modest for a titan of such scale. Julius Rosenwald never lived in Magnolia. Moreover, he spent his life's last 20 years systematically destroying his own wealth by investing it in projects that brought not a cent of profit. At his death moment, Chicago newspapers were preparing obituaries, trying to comprehend the figure's scale. Journalists wrote about how he turned Sears into a global empire. They calculated the company's revenue, which in 1929 reached $443 million. Yet they missed the main detail. Rosenwald's will contained a mechanism utterly alien to that time's capitalism logic. He ordered his charitable foundation spending all funds down to the last cent and self-liquidating within 25 years after his death. Usually magnates build mausoleums, libraries named after themselves, universities with golden letters on the facades. Rockefellers, Carnegies, Vanderbilts all sought immortality through stone and concrete. Rosenwald chose a different strategy. He decided his money should work here and now, rather than being preserved in endowments. He looked at Magnolia, Consumer Dream's pinnacle, and saw in it only a temporary shelter. True building, in his opinion, should come not from pine and brick, but from human potential. On January 6, 1932, while Rosenwald's body was cooling thousands of kilometers from Illinois in Alabama's and Mississippi's remote forests, other buildings stood. There were more than 5,000 of them. These weren't palaces with columns. These were simple wooden structures raised on brick pilings to protect the floor from rot. They had huge windows positioned to catch every sunlight ray because there was no electricity inside. These buildings weren't listed in Sears catalogs. They couldn't be bought by mail. Yet it was they, not the luxurious Magnolia, that became the main life project of the man who had just died. The story we're about to tell isn't just a businessman's biography. It's one of United States history's most radical social experiments chronicle. It's an investigation into how a Jewish immigrant son who sold men's suits used wild capitalism's mechanisms to hack the racial segregation system. We'll trace the path from the Sears catalog's glossy pages promising paradise for $5,000 to the South's muddy dirt roads where they could burn you alive for building a school. In the next few minutes, you'll see how an empire based on trust was created and how it was used to save an entire generation. You'll learn why only a few of the 7 sold Magnolia mansions have survived to this day, while the modest shacks built with Rosenwald's money produced an elite that changed the U.S. Constitution. Yet to understand the finale, we need returning to the beginning, to a world where the Rosenwald name meant nothing yet, and the Sears Company was on bankruptcy's brink. August 12, 1862, Springfield, Illinois. In a house located just a few blocks from Abraham Lincoln's residence, Julius Rosenwald is born. Outside the windows rages the Civil War. Lincoln is already in Washington signing decrees that will tear the country apart to put it back together. This neighborhood isn't just a geographical fact. Lincoln's shadow and the emancipation idea will become the foundation on which Rosenwald will build his empire, though at that moment no one could have imagined that a Jewish immigrant son from Germany would become a financial titan. His father, Samuel Rosenwald, started as a peddler, an itinerant trader walking from farm to farm with goods on his back. This was humiliation and survival school. Julius learned capitalism's first lesson even before he learned to read. Trust is a currency worth more than gold. Yet to convert trust into millions, scale was needed. By 1890, Julius was no longer a peddler's son, but a successful men's clothing manufacturer in Chicago. His firm, Rosenwald & Weil, sews suits, yet one client stands out from the rest, a strange, chaotic outfit called Sears, Roebuck & Company. They order thousands of suits, yet constantly delay payment. Richard Sears, the company's founder, was a marketing genius. He could sell sand in the desert by writing ad copy that took Iowa farmers' breath away. Yet, as an administrator, he was a disaster. Chicago's Sears warehouses resembled a battlefield after defeat. Orders were lost, money disappeared. Customers received farm implements instead of furniture. The office was in such chaos that employees simply burned complaint letter sacks to avoid dealing with them. The company was choking on its own growth. It needed money and order. In August 1895, An event occurs that changes American commerce history. Julius Rosenwald makes a decision many considered madness. He buys half a share in the Sears Company for $37,500. In today's terms, that's about $1.5 million. He enters the burning building not as a firefighter, but as an architect. Rosenwald didn't start writing ad slogans. He focused on mechanics. He introduced a system that seemed like science fiction at the time called the scheduling system. Each order was assigned an exact assembly time. If an order was to be assembled at 2:10 p.m., all goods from violins to plows had to arrive at the assembly shop exactly at that moment. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. He turned chaos into Swiss watches. He installed pneumatic tube mail that whistled as it carried manifests between the gigantic 300,000 square meter warehouse's floors. Yet Rosenwald's main invention was not logistics, but philosophy. He introduced the principle, satisfaction guaranteed, or we will refund your money. Today, it sounds banal. At the 19th century's end, it was revolution. A buyer living 1,000 kilometers from Chicago sent money to strangers, risking everything. Rosenwald said, "I take the risk." This destroyed fear's barrier. The result was stunning. Sales soared from $750,000 in 1895 to $50 million by 1907. In 1906, Rosenwald conducts the first major IPO in American retail trade history. The deal is organized by Henry Goldman of Goldman Sachs. Sears shares begin trading on the exchange, and Julius Rosenwald wakes up a multi-millionaire. Here begins the internal conflict that will determine Magnolia's and thousands of schools' fate. Rosenwald, being a man of strict logic, looks at his accounts and sees numbers there defying rational explanation. He works a lot, yet not 1,000 times more than his employees. He's smart, yet doesn't consider himself a genius. He comes to a conclusion that frightens other rich people of that time. His wealth is luck and circumstances result, not divine election. Don't confuse genius with a bull market, he'll say one day. This realization gives birth in him to deep discomfort's feeling. While his partners build castles and buy yachts, Rosenwald begins looking for a way to correct this system error. He sees America not from a limousine's window, but through millions of letters coming to Sears. He sees a country divided into two worlds, the white world, where there's access to credit and education, and the black world where poverty and lawlessness reign. For Rosenwald, this isn't a pity question. This is an inefficiency question. A huge part of the country's population is excluded from the economy. They cannot be good Sears customers because they have no money. They have no money because they have no education. The circle is closed, and Julius Rosenwald, the man who fixed Sears' logistics, decides to fix American society's logistics. Yet he needs a partner, a person who knows the problem from the inside, and fate prepares for him a meeting that will become as pivotal a moment as the Sears share purchase. In 1911, that era's most famous African-American arrives in Chicago. His name is Booker Taliaferro Washington, and he has a plan. May 18th, 1911, Chicago, the Blackstone Hotel on Michigan Avenue. This building is called the Hotel of Presidents, where those who shape the world's fates stay. In the lobby decorated with mahogany and marble, a man enters whose very presence here is societal norms' challenge. Booker Taliaferro Washington, a 50-year-old educator born into slavery, ascends in the elevator to the suite where Julius Rosenwald awaits him. This isn't just a polite visit. This is a clash of two worlds that in early 20th century America shouldn't have intersected. On one side is the Jewish capitalist, an immigrant son who has just turned commerce into a science. On the other is the black leader, whom white racists in the South consider a dangerous radical, and black radicals in the North begin accusing of excessive softness. Yet they have a common language. This language is efficiency. Washington doesn't beg for alms. He knows who he's talking to. Rosenwald despises beggars. He considers unsystematic charity throwing money to the wind. Washington puts on the table not photos of starving children, but a business plan. He offers Rosenwald investing in an entire people's future, just as he invested in Sears warehouses. The first move in this game was made not on schools, but on Young Men's Christian Association dormitories, YMCA. Washington said that black youth fleeing lynchings in the South to northern cities had nowhere to live. They needed safe harbors. Rosenwald listens and asks one question: how much? The answer is $25,000 for the building. Rosenwald nods, yet puts forward a condition that will become all his subsequent philosophy's cornerstone: the challenge strategy. I will give $25,000, says Rosenwald, yet only on the condition that the community itself raises another $75,000. This was a shock. Demanding that the poorest population segments collect a huge sum seemed like cruel mockery. Yet Rosenwald saw further. He understood ownership psychology. If a person gets something for free, he doesn't value it. If a person invests his last dollar in construction, he'll defend that building with a weapon in his hands. He'll feel like a shareholder, not a handout recipient. This was Sears Corporation principles transfer to social ground. The experiment worked. The money was raised, and then inspired by the success, Washington and Rosenwald look at the South's map. There where millions of illiterate children live for whom education officially ends in the 5th grade, if it starts at all. In 1912, in honor of his 50th birthday, Rosenwald makes the first tranche of $25,000 for the Tuskegee Institute headed by Washington. The goal is building 6 pilot schools in rural Alabama. At that very moment, while in Alabama they were drawing plans for wooden one-room schools, in Chicago's Sears headquarters, engineers and architects were working on an entirely different scale project. The company was preparing releasing its most ambitious product. This was the period after World War I's end. America was full of money and optimism. People wanted not just living, they wanted demonstrating their success. In Sears' architectural department lay blueprints marked with Code 289. Later, this project would receive the name Magnolia. This was businessman Rosenwald's response to white prospering America's demands. The designers were inspired by Southern plantation mansions. The irony was blinding. Rosenwald's company was selling the life dream in Gone with the Wind style, with columns and verandas symbolizing the old slaveholding South, while Rosenwald himself was secretly funding that very South's legacy's destruction through black children's education. Magnolia wasn't just a house. It was the most complex engineering operation. Sears architects broke the majestic mansion into 30,000 fragments. Every beam was numbered, every paint can was calculated to the ounce. This was standardization's pinnacle. Rosenwald proved that luxury could be industrialized, that an aristocratic lifestyle could be packed into 2 railroad cars and shipped to any continent point. In the 1918 catalog, Magnolia's description occupied an honor place. The text read, "This house expresses the highest degree of dignity and influence." It had 10 rooms, a huge hall 3 by 7 meters in size, a dining room capable of seating 20 guests, 4 second-floor bedrooms each with a dressing room, a tiled bathroom, a solarium with glass walls. The kit price was nearly $6,000. Yet including the foundation, plumbing, heating, and builder's work, the total cost easily exceeded $15,000. These were huge money sums. While Magnolia's first orders were being processed in Chicago, a tragedy was unfolding in the South that nearly buried the school project. In November 1915, Booker T. Washington dies. The man who was the bridge between Rosenwald and the black community departs. It seemed the alliance would fall apart. Critics said that the rich white Northerner would lose interest in the complex problem without his guide. Yet Washington's death had the opposite effect. Rosenwald perceived it not as the project's end, but as a personal obligation. He decides scaling the idea. Instead of 6 schools, he wants building 600 and then 6,000. He officially creates the Rosenwald Fund in 1917. Here occurs 2 worlds' final merger. Rosenwald begins applying Magnolia's logistics to school construction. He hires architects who develop standard school designs for 1 teacher, for 2 teachers, for 3. Like the Sears houses, these schools were planned down to the last nail. School plans were printed in booklets distributed among communities. Plan number 1, a school for 1 teacher. Budget, $400 from the fund, the rest from the community and local authorities. Site requirements, minimum 2 acres of land so children could learn agriculture. Building orientation strictly east-west or north-south to maximize natural lighting. Windows had to be high so light would fall over the student's left shoulder without creating shadows when writing. This was the same details obsession that created Magnolia. Only the goal was different. Magnolia created isolation, defense, private property, solitude's grandeur. The school created community. To get Rosenwald's money, black farmers who often had no cash gave lumber, labor, land. White school boards, which for years ignored black education, were forced investing too, because Rosenwald issued an ultimatum. Either you provide part of the money and take the school on your balance sheet, or I give not a cent. He used his dollars as leverage to force the state fulfilling its duties. By the 1920s beginning, this mechanism worked like a perfectly tuned machine. Trains from Chicago carried to the South not only materials for luxurious mansions, but also quality standards for poor schools. Rosenwald created a unique situation. He sold elitism to whites and gave dignity to blacks using the same corporate management methods. Yet a conflict was brewing in this scheme. The more successful the schools became, the more they irritated those wanting to preserve the old order, and Magnolia, success's symbol, began turning into excess's symbol that would soon become unaffordable luxury. The Great Depression was still far off, yet the first cracks in the American Dream's foundation had already begun appearing, and Julius Rosenwald, standing at his power's peak, began feeling that simply building buildings wasn't enough. It was necessary changing the very consciousness of the people living in those buildings. Let's step inside. Forget about schools and social justice for a minute. To understand Rosenwald's renunciation scale, you first need seeing the temptation scale he created. We're transported to 1922 to South Carolina or Pennsylvania, where one of the 7 daredevils decided assembling Magnolia before you isn't just a house. This is a psychological bunker, a facade 24 meters wide, a 2-level portico supported by 4 massive Ionic columns carved from the finest cypress. When you approach this building, you feel small. This is no accident. Sears architects working under Rosenwald knew exactly what they were selling. They were selling power. In a world where most Americans lived in cramped cottages, Magnolia shouted, "The owner of this place has won the game called life." You ascend the wide steps. The entrance door is a heavy oak slab with beveled mirror glass. You turn the brass handle cast in Chicago and enter the hall. This is the first shocking space. There's no functionality here, only theater. The hall area is 25 square meters. To the right is a majestic staircase with birch railings bent by hand. It's created for one purpose, for the house mistress to descend to guests during a reception. Turn left. The living room, 8 by 12 meters long. 3 huge French windows face the facade. A fireplace faced with brick or marble, depending on the extra payment, can hold 1.5-meter logs. Here it smells of varnish, expensive cigars, and old money, though that money was earned just a year ago. Ceilings nearly 3 meters high create cathedral acoustics. Every sound here has weight. Go further through the double doors into the dining room. It's designed for a banquet table for 20 persons. The walls are paneled, imitating 18th century English manners, yet if you knock on them, you'll hear American efficiency's sound. This isn't century-old oak. This is high-quality pine cut on Illinois machines with millimeter precision. This is an illusion stronger than reality. Yet the most interesting room is hidden from guests' eyes. This is the kitchen and butler's pantry. Here, Sears architecture reveals its true essence. If the grand halls are aristocracy imitation, the kitchen is technology's hymn. Built-in cabinets, refrigeration chambers with separately delivered ice, ergonomic work surfaces. Magnolia was a hybrid. Outside the South's romantic myth, inside the North's industrial machine. And finally, go up to the second floor, the master's bedroom, 23 square meters. A private bathroom with a cast-iron clawfoot tub covered in double-fired enamel. In the early 1920s, having a private bathroom for each bedroom was unheard-of luxury. Most Americans still washed in tin basins in the kitchen. In Magnolia, water flowed through pipes, hidden in the walls like blood in Leviathan's veins. The house had a total of 10 main rooms, not counting utility rooms, the solarium, and balconies. The total area exceeded 370 square meters. Building it required 45 tons of materials. Yet let's look at the numbers from another angle. Magnolia's turnkey cost was about $15,000 in 1920. A factory worker's average annual income at that time was $1,500. That is, this house cost 10 years of an ordinary person's life, assuming he wouldn't eat or drink. It was an inequality monument that could be ordered by mail. Now, keeping this luxury image in mind, let's move to Julius Rosenwald's own house in Chicago's Hyde Park district. Did he live in something like that? Yes, his house was large, yet his attitude toward it was diametrically opposite. For the Magnolia buyer, the house was the goal. For Rosenwald, the house was a tool. In his dining room, which was no smaller than the one we just described, meetings took place that made neighbors' hair stand on end. Imagine this scene. At a table with a white tablecloth sits one of America's richest white men, and opposite him are black professors, preachers, activists. Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois. Servants serve kosher food. In Magnolia, the walls were built to separate the elite from the plebs. In Rosenwald's house, the walls shook from debates about how to dismantle barriers. Magnolia visitors discussed cotton prices and social gossip. Rosenwald's visitors discussed lynchings and school blueprints. This is where the story's main architectural paradox lies. Rosenwald gave America the opportunity to build personal palaces to earn money, which he then spent building public fortresses, schools. Rosenwald's schools were Magnolia's antithesis. In Magnolia, there were complex corridors and seclusion rooms. In the schools, there was open plan. Partitions between classrooms were removable. Why? So that in the evening, the school could be turned into an adult community center. In Magnolia, windows were decoration. In schools, windows were survival technology. There exists a document, a paint specification for Rosenwald schools. It states, the interior must be painted in light tones to reflect maximum light, yet the wall's lower part must be dark to hide children's dirty hands' traces. This is a piercing humanity detail. Rosenwald knew that the children who would come to these schools would have hands in the dirt because they worked in the fields before lessons. In Magnolia, dirty hands were unacceptable. In Rosenwald schools, they were a sign that the child was trying to break out of poverty's cycle. By the mid-1920s, Magnolia sales stopped. Only about 7 kits were sold. Why? It was too grandiose even for the Jazz Age. It required too much land, too many servants, too much pomp. It was Sears' Evolution's dead end, and the school project, conversely, was gaining momentum. By 1927, the fund celebrated the 3,000th school's opening. Magnolia was static. It stood as the owner's egoism monument. The schools were dynamic. They produced graduates. Yet, it was at this very moment when the contrast between Magnolia's dying luxury and the school's living energy reached its peak that a break occurs in Rosenwald's personal life. The man who so meticulously constructed happiness for millions of others faces the fact that his own architectural and life plans begin crumbling under fate's blows. His wife, Augusta Nussbaum, his main moral compass, dies, and Julius Rosenwald, surrounded by his millions and thousands of thank-you letters, finds himself in icy solitude in his own huge house. May 23, 1929, Chicago. The Hyde Park mansion plunges into unnatural silence. In the master bedroom, surrounded by the best doctors that money could hire, Augusta Nussbaum Rosenwald dies. She was 60 years old. For Julius, this isn't just a spouse's loss. This is a navigation system's loss. It's at this moment that the story makes a sharp turn from buildings architecture to the human soul's architecture. To understand the crisis's depth, one must realize who Augusta was. If Julius was Sears' empire's engine, Augusta was the brakes holding that machine from falling into vanity's abyss. It was she who for 40 years blocked any attempts by her husband to live as the Magnolia buyers did. When Rosenwald first got rich and wanted buying a luxurious fur coat, Augusta refused wearing it. When he proposed building a castle on the North Shore similar to those built by the Vanderbilts, she said, We have enough rooms to sleep in and enough tables to eat at. Everything else is a burden. She was Magnolia's antithesis' living embodiment. She despised columns and gilding, considering them a mask for inner emptiness. Her death 5 months before the 1929 stock market crash exposed to Rosenwald a terrible truth. He had won the capitalist race, yet the finish line turned out to be a cliff's edge. He was left one-on-one with a fortune of $200 million. And here we encounter our hero's deepest moral ambivalence. Was Julius Rosenwald a saint? No, he was a tough, calculating capitalist. In Sears stores, female workers received the minimum allowable wage. He fought against unions. He was part of a system that exploited labor for efficiency. His philanthropy was essentially an attempt to correct the very economic model's consequences that he himself had perfected. This creates the most complex moral conflict. Can a person who earned money on a harsh sweatshop system atone for it by building schools for the poor? After his wife's death, this conflict intensifies. Rosenwald begins panicking that his money will destroy his own children. He had seen how other magnates' heirs turned into idle celebrities, burning through life in Monte Carlo casinos. He writes, "I would prefer seeing my children begging for alms than becoming idlers living off interest." This is a cruel phrase for a loving father, yet it shows his obsession. He didn't want creating a dynasty. Unlike the Magnolia model built for centuries to be passed from father to son, Rosenwald decides that his empire must die with him. In these solitude months, wandering through his house, he formulates a concept that shocks the philanthropic world. He calls it the dead hand. Rosenwald studies Benjamin Franklin's and Stephen Girard's fund's history. He sees how money bequeathed 100 years ago for specific purposes lies as dead weight, because the world has changed, yet the will's conditions remain the same. Funds have turned into bureaucratic monsters whose goal is preserving capital, not solving problems. "I do not believe in donations eternity," he declares. The generation that created the wealth must spend it on solving its time's problems. This was a rebellion against the very legacy idea that Sears sold. The catalog promised, "Buy this house and your grandchildren will live in it." Rosenwald said, "Spend it all now. Grandchildren must take care of themselves." Yet fate prepares another blow for him that will test his philosophy to breaking point. The house becomes even quieter when the children leave, and then a figure appears in Rosenwald's life who perhaps saves him from complete despair, yet at the same time threatens his high society reputation. We won't speculate on their relationship's nature, yet the facts are, in his life's last years, he grows close to Adelaide Goodman, his widowed sister-in-law. This causes whispers in Chicago drawing rooms. Society, which forgave him his black's friendship, attributing it to a rich man's eccentricity, couldn't forgive family canon's violation. Rosenwald, the man who always controlled his public image, suddenly stops caring about the Millionaires Club opinion. His focus shifts to specific people. He begins saving talents. One of this period's brightest stories is related to Marian Anderson, the great black singer. When she was denied the opportunity to study and perform because of her skin color, it was Rosenwald's fund that intervened, not just by giving money, but by opening doors. Rosenwald saw in her the same thing he saw in school blueprints, potential strangled by the system. Yet Rosenwald's personal tragedy was that he was building a future that he himself couldn't see. He received thousands of letters from children from the schools he built. They wrote on wrapping paper with pencils. Mr. Rosenwald, thank you for the light. Mr. Rosenwald, now I can read. He read these letters in the evenings, sitting in an armchair in his study. These were his true dividends. Yet each letter reminded him of the chasm between his world, the world of telephones, cars, and hot water, and the world where having a wooden floor in a school was considered a miracle. By fall 1929, Rosenwald feels tired. His heart begins failing. Doctors recommend rest. Yet he continues working. He feels time is short. He urges the fund managers, spend faster. He wants seeing results. He allocates huge grants to black colleges, Howard, Fisk, Dillard. He understands that elementary schools aren't enough. Elites are needed. Doctors, lawyers, teachers are needed. And then an event occurs that makes his philosophy not just noble, but prophetic. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The stock exchange crashes. Within a few days, Rosenwald's fortune melts before his eyes. Sears' shares price falls from $181 to $30. For any other magnate, this would have been the end. For Rosenwald, it becomes truth's moment. While his neighbors throw themselves out of skyscraper windows having lost their fortunes, Rosenwald performs an act that finally separates him from the capitalist's class. He doesn't save his personal assets. He does something unthinkable. He learns that hundreds of his employees, ordinary Sears clerks and managers, had taken loans secured by company shares to buy houses, possibly even those very magnolias. Now, with the shares crashed, the banks are ready taking everything from them. They'll become destitute. Rosenwald calls his lawyer and signs a check. He takes on his employees' debts. He guarantees their accounts with his own remaining personal money. This isn't fun charity. This is a personal gesture. He spends millions of dollars, tens of millions in today's terms, to save people whose names he doesn't even know from the system collapse's consequences that he himself built. At this moment, Magnolia as a symbol dies completely. The luxurious mansion is no longer a refuge. In the Great Depression, those survive who have not columns, but community. Rosenwald proved that his real home was not real estate, but people. Yet this gesture costs him dearly. His health deteriorates rapidly. He enters 1930 not as a mighty titan, but as an old man who sees the world plunging into darkness and tries lighting as many matches as he can before his own candle goes out. 1930 arrives. The America we saw at our story's beginning, the country of confident growth and endless opportunities, ceases existing. In its place lies ruin. The Great Depression, like acid, eats away at society's very fabric. And it's here, against national collapse's backdrop, that Magnolia's fate and Rosenwald's legacy fate finally diverge in opposite directions, creating this drama's most powerful contrast. Look at those few Magnolia mansions that managed being built. By the early 1930s, these catalog palaces turn into unfulfilled hopes monuments. The owners who yesterday considered themselves elite cannot pay for heating 10 rooms. Majestic Cypress Ionic columns begin graying from paint lack. Drafts blow through luxurious halls because broken windows are boarded up with plywood. There's nothing to replace the glass with. Banks mass repossess these houses for debts. Success's symbol becomes burden symbol. The material world on which Merchant Rosenwald's entire career was staked crumbles before his eyes. Yet in the Ravinia office where Julius Rosenwald is fading, the opposite process occurs. The economic crisis becomes a catalyst for meaning crystallization. Rosenwald, whose body is weakened by diabetes and heart failure, enters his activity's last, most aggressive phase. He understands brick and wood, even in schools, aren't eternal. Racists can burn schools, and this happened. Schools can rot. If magnolias are collapsing, then where's the guarantee that his social project will stand? He needs a new investment form, indestructible, and he finds it, human intellect. In the economic chaos midst, when other funds cut budgets and conserve funds, Rosenwald performs his strategy's radical transformation. He shifts from building walls to building leaders. The fund launches a scholarship program that has no analogs in its scale and boldness. Rosenwald's logic was simple and ruthless, like a Sears balance sheet. He saw that racial segregation was strangling talents. This was efficiency loss. A genius poet worked as a loader. A great biologist mopped floors. Rosenwald decided giving these people what he gave Sears customers: access. Yet not to goods, but to time. He bought time for them so they could create, learn, and grow without thinking about a bread piece. The list of those who receive these investments today reads like 20th century American culture's pantheon. Yet then, in 1930, these were just names in the fund's card file. Marian Anderson, whose voice would later be called a national treasure. Langston Hughes, the poet who became the Harlem Renaissance's voice. Ralph Bunche, the future Nobel laureate who would help create the UN. Gordon Parks, the photographer who would show the world real poverty's face. Rosenwald didn't dictate to them what to do. He didn't demand an account for every cent. He applied to people the same principle he applied to his managers: find the best and give them freedom. This was capital's transcendence. Money turned into art, science, diplomacy. At the same time, Rosenwald enters his last public battle. This was an intellectual battle against the Eternal Fund's very idea. In essays published in the Atlantic Monthly and the Saturday Evening Post, he attacks philanthropy's sacred cow. He writes, "I am against the past's dead hand controlling the living present." Most magnates of that time, Rockefeller, Carnegie, created funds intended for eternal existence. They wanted their names living for millennia. Rosenwald called this vanity and folly. He argued that it's impossible predicting the future's needs. Money set aside to fight 19th century diseases is useless in the 20th century. The generation that created the wealth is obligated spending it on solving its time's problems. He declares, this causes indignation storm. He's called a madman who wants squandering a great legacy. Yet Rosenwald is unyielding. He amends his fund's charter with a strict change that legally enshrines his philosophy. The Julius Rosenwald Fund is obligated spending all its capital, both principal and interest, within 25 years after the founder's death. This was an efficiency self-destruction act. He wanted the fund operating at maximum intensity during the hardest period, not conserving strength for a hypothetical future. It was like a ship captain ordering all furniture and paneling thrown into the furnace to give the vessel maximum speed in a storm. By 1931's end, Rosenwald can hardly get out of bed. His world shrinks to the bedroom size, yet his decision's impact expands to history's scale. Reports come to him: 5,000 schools built, hundreds of scholarship recipients working in laboratories and universities. Within 500,000 black children already studying in Rosenwald schools. Every third black child in the South sits at a desk paid for partly by catalog house sales money and partly by his parents' calluses. In these last months, another quiet transformation occurs. Rosenwald, a numbers man, begins understanding his path's mystical nature. He, the seller-turned-philanthropist, realizes that his true wealth isn't the $200 million that melted away, but the hope network he wove. The contrast is blinding. Somewhere in North Carolina, a family packs things, leaving Magnolia sold for debts. Their personal palace dream shattered by the Great Depression. And in Alabama, in his simple wooden school, a boy opens a book. His school is poor. He has no shoes. Yet his dream is just beginning. And this dream is paid for by the man dying in Illinois. Rosenwald rethought ownership's very concept. Magnolia taught, you are what you own. Schools and scholarships taught, you are what you give. In December 1931, he gathers his children. He doesn't talk about business. He talks about responsibility. He leaves them money, yet not so much that they could avoid working. He leaves them a task. His son, Lessing Rosenwald, must head the funds board and fulfill his father's will to bring the fund to zero, close it, destroy the organization to complete the mission. On January 6, 1932, the denouement arrives. His heart stops. Julius Rosenwald departs. Yet unlike pharaohs, he takes nothing with him. He leaves a mechanism that will operate for another 16 years, distributing millions of dollars until exactly zero remains in the account. Rosenwald's death isn't the story's end, but its most astonishing phase's beginning. The phase when the benefactor's name begins disappearing, erasing from memory as he wanted, while the seeds he planted begin bearing fruit capable of destroying the USA's apartheid system. Magnolia was built to stand forever, yet began crumbling in 10 years. The schools were built as temporary shacks, yet they created the foundation on which the civil rights movement would stand. Now all that remains is summing up and seeing how this paradox resolved in eternity, how Rosenwald himself's memory disappearance became his success proof, and why today, almost 100 years later, we must seek his legacy not in architecture museums, but in Congress halls and on opera houses' stages. In 1948, Lessing Rosenwald signs the last check. The account balance reaches zero. The fund officially announces its self-liquidation. The great philanthropy machine stops, having fulfilled the Creator's last will. Silence falls. No marble memorials, no eternal endowments, no annual banquets in the founder's honor. Julius Rosenwald's name begins slowly dissolving into history exactly as he planned. Today, if you want finding a Magnolia mansion, you'll have to spend months searching. Of the 7 confirmed specimens, only a few have survived. Most rotted away, burned down, or were demolished by bulldozers for new shopping centers. These palaces, which once cost 10 years of a worker's life, have turned into historical curiosities, cold and empty ghosts of the Gilded Age's ambitions. Yet look around. Glance at modern America's political and cultural map. Medgar Evers, who gave his life for civil rights. Maya Angelou, whose voice became the nation's conscience. Congressman John Lewis, whose struggle changed the USA's laws. All of them are Rosenwald School's children. All of them sat at desks in simple wooden buildings built with money from catalog goods sale. The paradox is complete. The man who taught America unrestrained consumption left his greatest legacy through complete ownership renunciation. Julius Rosenwald didn't build himself a bronze monument because he knew a secret inaccessible to Magnolia's builders. The only way to remain in eternity is to become an invisible foundation under others' feet. Magnolia was merely a beautiful ego cage. Rosenwald chose the key, and although we've almost forgotten the one who forged that key's name, the door he opened can no longer be closed. In the end, history judges us not by what we bought, but by what we gave when it came time to pay the bills.